This is the moment a room of grieving reporters burst into cheers as their anti-Putin journalist colleague, who they thought was dead, appeared alive at a press conference today. Arkady Babchenko's stunned colleagues erupted into celebration and jumped around their Kiev newsroom after the 41-year-old sensationally walked out on stage alive and unharmed. Some of the bewildered journalists collapsed into tears while others sat in stunned silence as they watched the bombshell revelation unfold that his death had been staged to smoke out a Russian murder plot. Babchenko, who has previously said he feared a Russian assassination attempt, apologized to friends and family who had begun mourning for him at the press conference, including his own wife. Late on Wednesday night, dozens of journalists descended upon the central square in Kiev laughing, hugging and drinking sparkling wine as they celebrated Babchenko's resurrection. On Tuesday, Kiev and national police had said Babchenko, a strong critic of the Kremlin, had been shot multiple times in the back at his apartment building and been found bleeding by his wife. They even issued a picture purportedly showing his bullet-riddled body. Kiev had been quick to blame Russia's totalitarian machine for Babchenko's murder, which the Kremlin denied. Moscow has now said that Ukraine had used Babchenko as a propaganda tool. The two nations have been in an ongoing conflict since Vladimir Putin invaded the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. At today's press conference, Gritsik said the reason for SBU's elaborate plan to fake Babchenko's death had been to catch the Ukrainian man hired to kill him, and his Russian paymasters. Gritsik said investigators had identified a Ukrainian citizen who had been recruited and paid $40,000 by the Russian security service to organize the killing. The unnamed Ukrainian had in turn hired an acquaintance as the gunman, who they had also identified, and both men had been arrested. However, Gritsik did not reveal how the SBU had been able to trace the chain of events from the two unnamed Ukrainian men, back to the Russians, nor how they could prove that they were the ones responsible for paying them. The SBU later released a video purportedly showing them arresting a man in Kiev today, who they claim is a suspected Russian agent who they say ordered the hit on Babchenko. They did not identify the man and gave no extra detail. When Babchenko, who has 6 daughters, 5 of whom are adopted, was ushered into the room, he said, "Apologies to my wife, Olga, I'm sorry, but there were no other options. The operation was being prepared for 2 months. They told me a month ago. As the result of the operation, a man is taken, he is in custody." One Ukrainian minister compared the operation to a Sherlock Holmes plot, where the fictional detective had staged his own death. "It's an incredible story of a resurrection," joked Russian journalist Pavel Konyin, who like several of his Russian colleagues had rushed to Kiev to cover the story. "It's a miracle, but a miracle that turned out to be a staged drama. We were preparing for the funeral, many of us didn't sleep last night. We bought plane tickets for the first flight to Kiev," said Konyin, who works for the investigative Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta. He was at the offices of the Ukrainian private television ATR, where Babchenko works, when the murdered journalist made his surprise reappearance. "Everybody just erupted, shouting hooray, he's alive, it was an incredible moment," he said. Igor Solovey, international editor for the Ukrainian Pound. UA News website, was all smiles as he stood in the square with a cigarette in his mouth and a plastic glass of bubbly in his hand. "I just turned on the TV and saw his magical appearance," he said. "It was a shock. I was standing, I had to sit down. I couldn't even speak." Some in the news business wondered about the impact that Ukraine's ruse will have on the media, in particular in public confidence in their work. "For 24 hours we were putting out fake news," one editor said. "Obviously some think this will damage confidence in the special services, the security services and the media," said Konyin. "Our readers or viewers are of course going to ask questions when we cry wolf." Babchenko himself was in a meeting with Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko as the group of journalists from local and international media popped corks and took selfies. Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko has said they will provide protection to Babchenko and his family. Ukrainian law enforcement agencies are becoming stronger every day in countering Russian aggression, Poroshenko said on Twitter. "It is unlikely that Moscow will calm down. I've given an order to provide Arkady and his family with protection." Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, "The fact that Babchenko is alive is the best news," but added that Ukraine was using the case for propaganda. Russian Senator Sergei Kalashnikov claimed Ukraine was guilty of continuous fake information on all issues. Babchenko, a former soldier in the Chechen War who became one of Russia's best-known war correspondents, had left his homeland fearing for his life after criticizing Russian policy in Ukraine and Syria. His apparent death had been reported in Ukraine yesterday, with Kiev police saying he had been shot dead after returning to his home after going food shopping. Ukrainian police spokesman Yaroslav Trikalo had said Babchenko was found bleeding by his wife after she heard shooting, adding that he died in an ambulance on his way to hospital. Images circulated of Babchenko lying on his front with holes in the back of his shirt, and a pool of blood underneath him. The first and the most probable reason for his murder is his professional activity, Kiev Police Chief Andrei Kryschenko had said at a televised press briefing earlier today. Ukrainian authorities even released a drawing of the man they suspect is Babchenko's assassin, around 40 to 45 years old, with a grey beard and wearing a cap. I am convinced that the Russian totalitarian machine did not forgive him his honesty and principled stance, Ukrainian Prime Minister Volodymyr Groysman said late Tuesday. A true friend of Ukraine who was telling the world the truth about Russian aggression. His murderers should be punished. This afternoon, Ukrainian Interior Minister, Anton Gashchenko admitted that he had been among a limited circle of people who knew that the murder had been staged. Writing on Facebook he said, "Arkady Babchenko is alive." As a result of a brilliant special operation conducted by Ukrainian law enforcers, the killer who was ordered to murder Arkady and the organizer of the murder were detained. In order to document the customers and organizers of the crime, the representatives of the Russian special services, they had to be assured that the hired killer had successfully completed the order. The fact that the murder of Arkady Babchenko was staged was known to a very limited circle of people. This was done in the interests of preventing the slightest possibility of information leakage. He continued, to do this, law enforcement officers had to stage a large-scale information security operation. This entailed publishing pictures of the allegedly murdered Arkady Babchenko, and distributing the identikit of the alleged killer with a Caucasian appearance. To create a picture of full reality, statements about the death of Arkady were made by officials of our national police. Law enforcers clearly understood that the news of the murder of Arkady Babchenko would be a pain for thousands of hearts around the world. But they had no other choice. In order to trace and document the chain from the killer to the organizers and customers, it was necessary to create in them full confidence that the order was executed and force them to take a number of actions that will be documented by the investigation. After all, even Sherlock Holmes successfully used the method of staging his own death for the effective investigation of complex and intricate crimes. No matter how painful it was for his relatives and friends. A unique special operation to prevent the murder of Arkady Babchenko is an example of effective cooperation between the security service and the national police in the prevention of terrorist attacks and political murders. Unique is also the fact that there was no leakage of information about this special operation either before the staging of the murder of Arkady Babchenko or after. This suggests that we have learned to fight on the invisible front of confrontation with Russian special services. I thank all honest and daring staff of the security service, the National Police and the Prosecutor's Office for your contribution to the protection of the national security of Ukraine and for saving the lives of Arkady Babchenko, Igor Bogdanov, me and other targets of Russian saboteurs. I wish Arkady Babchenko health and long life. After being blamed for Babchenko's death, Russian authorities had furiously denied the blame, with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov saying earlier today that it was very sad Moscow had been accused of murdering the reporter. The Ukrainian Prime Minister is already talking about how it was done by Russian secret services, he said. This fashion of conducting international affairs is very sad, Lavrov told reporters, and investigators in Moscow opened their own probe. The investigative committee is not going to turn a blind eye to the cruel crimes against Russian citizens, it said in a statement. On Monday, Babchenko had tweeted about a perceived threat from former Kremlin insider Marina Yudinich, who had called for Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, a close Putin ally, to invite him for tea. Babchenko believed this referred to the murder of former KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko in London in 2006, who was poisoned with radioactive polonium in his tea. Kadyrov is also suspected by Russian opposition figures of being behind a number of killings of Kremlin critics. In a tweet on Monday he referred to the threat, stating, "When the president's representative openly posts an offer to have you killed." The threat was made by Yudinich in a social media post, which read, "So Ramzan is making tea for journalists. I am just wondering, should he not organize a tea party for another representative of the journalism community?" He stays in Ukraine now, too, and claims to fight on Kiev's side. He is being fed there, but I think tea at Ramzan's will be a lot more useful. Yudinich's post was published in 2014, and it is possible that Babchenko suddenly raised her comment this week, as part of the plot to fake his death.